Good. So let's start with the panels. The panel is about positive tech. When we started to prepare for MCE last year, after the MCE third edition finished, we thought about some theme, some way how we can make the event different. And when we did, we came up with the idea, when we brainstormed, we came with the idea that it should be about positive tech, because we were talking about, a lot of us were talking about, like, we want to make something good. We want our technology that we deliver to have positive impact on people's life, not only, like having kittens shared on Facebook and stuff like that. So then we thought positive tech is the theme that should be for the conference, and we made a lot of effort to make sure that we have a lot of positive tech themed talks during the MCE. But what positive tech really is, this is really important. First of all, let me ask to our panelists to introduce themselves. Siri, maybe you can start with you.
Yep. Hi, I'm Siri Betts-Sonstegard. I'm a designer for IBM Watson Health, and I work on products to help clinicians make decisions and discover information about their patients in oncology.
Mm-hmm. Michael?
Okay. I now feel deeply inadequate. Hi, I'm Michael. I've been building apps for about 10 years. I'm currently working at an insurtech startup in London, so kind of doing a lot of profiling, a lot of risk analysis on people.
I've got my own microphone.
Jeff?
I'm Jeff Watkins. I raise 4 cats and 1 daughter, which is really the most important thing that I do. I write iOS software, and I teach a public speaking class, which is probably the most interesting thing that I try to do. And that's pretty much it these days.
You don't need mic.
I don't, but I feel like it would be rude to yell at everybody all morning. I yell at people professionally because I'm an accessibility professional. So I feel like all I do is yell at developers, so I'm going to speak nicely today. My name is Billy Gregory. I work for a company called the Paciello Group. I'm the director of training there, so I basically travel around the world and train groups of developers and designers and QA on how to make their websites more beautiful and elegant. That's my lesser important role. I'm also a dad of 2 daughters, which is pretty awesome. And I'm also the co-organizer of a meetup group in Toronto all about accessibility.
Thank you. Good. So the title of this panel is We're Counting on You, and you'll find out towards the end what the title means. But let's first start with positive tech. So when we started to brainstorm what positive tech might mean, everyone came with their own ideas. That's between the organizers. And we tried even to explain to our speakers when we invited them to the conference what it means. But it was not very easy to explain that. So my first question is to the panelists here is like, what positive tech means to you? What do you think about when you think about positive tech, positive technology? Michael, you like one that would like to start.
It's a good job I've had some coffee. Actually go upstairs and make the coffee because it's really good for the mixer. It's a really interesting question because I think it depends on the person to a degree, right? Like, so it's very personal. Like, what makes you feel that you've achieved something positive in the world is very personal to you. So, for example, insurance is where I'm working right now. Let's be honest, it doesn't sound very exciting. But it is actually really interesting because we're talking about a situation that's happening in the UK where a lot of people are not getting financial services anymore, which again sounds incredibly dull. But it does mean that in the future, there's going to be potentially a kind of underclass of people who can't get insurance, who don't have savings, who don't have a pension. What do we do about that? And so even though we're a business that's trying to make money and sell people insurance, we're also trying to think about the ideas of like what happens to these people? How could we build a product that may actually allow them to get insurance, to get pensions, to have savings? So I think it's very much about what you see as positive, what the things are that you can put into the world that you think are going to make an impact, that are going to have a difference.
Okay, that's very interesting to hear, positive tech associated with insurance.
Yeah, I never thought I would say the thing I just said, but certainly
Yeah.
6 months ago. But yeah.
Yeah. Siri.
I think it's similarly, I've had the same feeling, right? So like how do you define positive tech versus negative tech? And then where's the in-between? We were talking about this last night. And I do think it's all about how you frame it. Like, by creating products that help people understand their insurance, you're giving them a sense of safety, and safety is something that, makes us feel joy and not feel afraid for the future. And I think, yeah, totally. And I think as human beings, we're always going to see the negative. We're always going to our brains are going to trip to that dystopian future because that's what's kept us alive and let us evolve as humans, is that we think of that negative future and we try and counteract it very quickly. So I think it's, you can always find a positive nature in the work that you do.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, I think you are partially originator of the idea of the panel. That's where it all started from. So maybe you can tell more.
Yes. So the problem is that I'm deeply skeptical of technology in general, and I feel like I'm unequal to the task of defining positive technology, because I feel like technology is racing ahead of us, and we seem to be adopting it before we've really even decided what it is, and only long after the technology is out there do we find ways to mitigate its effects and make it positive, and we find ways to make it positive. But in so many ways, it's like we have to work harder to make it positive than I almost think we ought. And I recognize that does sound super dystopian, right? And I feel bad about that.
I don't think so. I think we will talk about that later during the panel, but I think that's a very valid point.
Yeah, and so I think there are so many great things about technology, but I think partly because we are advancing so quickly, and we're just doing it with such enthusiasm, that sometimes we don't necessarily think 100% about the positive applications of it. We just think, this is so cool. Let me just go do this, which is fine because we gotta figure these things out in the first place. But
Okay, let's take it from there. Billy?
So, by the nature of what I do for a living, anything positive for me is, and I'm walking a very fine line here because I've got a lot of this in my talk later, and I don't want to use all of my really smart points now because then I'll look very stupid later. But for me, positive tech is anything that gives us access to somebody. We often talk about accessibility in terms of access for people with disabilities. So screw that. I want access to those people. I want access to my best friends that are in wheelchairs that are nonverbal. I want that sort of anything that provides me another way to communicate and get ideas out of people that might not be serviced otherwise, then that's a positive for me.
Okay, that's great. And accessibility is a very important topic also for MCE. You will see a lot of talks during MCE about accessibility. So that's the topic that we will be touching on quite often. Let's move to the future, or maybe present. So we are, in a way, living in the age of wonders. Yeah. So like when we were kids, we were dreaming about flying cars and autonomous cars and stuff like that. And autonomous cars are just around the corner. Soon maybe we'll be flying to Mars. Solar energy is picking up. Hyperloop, Mars solar energy hyperloop by one person, pretty much. And it's really privileged to use all those technologies all over the places. We can use this technology. We can make use of them, and they change the life of people in sometimes negative, sometimes positive way. But my question for now is like, what is your a technology that either now or in the near future you think will be the most impactful and will change people's life, and will make a positive impact on people's life? And I would like to start with Jeff. I think we had a discussion yesterday started about that, so you have some interesting point to make.
Yeah, so one of the technologies that I've seen that has made a dramatic difference to people is this photo sharing ability. I mean, we saw it with the Arab Spring, where those of us who had no real knowledge of what was going on, suddenly we saw what was happening, right? We saw that, you know, these folks were experiencing situations that were just amazing to us. And we saw with Ferguson, where protesters were, you know, being beaten down by riot cops, and you know, black folks being shot dead in the streets, and none of that would have occurred without cell phones with cameras in them. And I can't really think of a single small little technology that has, in the last couple of years, made a bigger impact. Now, there are probably technologies that could make a longer term impact, you know, gene splicing and all sorts of other fantastic things, but the power to actually change our society and show what's really happening is just tremendous. Because it's not that, for example, to use the example of police killing people of color, it's not that they're killing more people of color now, it's just that we know. They've always been doing it. It's just now that they're being videoed doing it. And so, yes, I love to take photographs of my daughter. So advancements in photography are a big deal to me. I love to share those photographs. So any advancement there is big to me, but advancements in that regard are also huge for society. The more those videos can be streamed live to the internet and can't be shut down by governments, that makes a huge difference. And that's tremendously positive to society. May not be so positive to the governments in charge, but I'm afraid I don't care about them.
Really?
As far as current technology goes, I think probably the biggest thing that's impacted my life in the last couple of years is something relatively simple that we saw in, you know, movies years ago. It's just FaceTime. The ability to call up. I mean, I mentioned I have two daughters. For the longest time, I live in Toronto, Canada, and my daughters lived in Paris, France. So I could call them or we could text or whatever, but being able to FaceTime with them made the world shrink that much more. I mentioned having friends that were nonverbal. One of my best friends and one of my co-organizers, Johnny, is in a wheelchair, and I'll tell his story more later. But he can't really speak, so calling him on the phone doesn't work. Texting him is fine, but he's, you know, mostly paralyzed, so he can't text all that fast. But we can FaceTime, and he can nod and then, you know, give me the finger or whatever he wants to do in reply. And that's a great way for us to stay in contact with each other. So, I mean, that's amazing. Now, as far as the future, you know, think of the ways we can change the world with virtual and augmented reality. Now, let's keep in mind that we're talking about the visual here, but I mean, there's many different realities for many different people. So there might come a time where we can really, really make an impactful, you know, change in someone's life by using VR, be it travel or just feeling what it's like to get out of a chair and move around. So there's a lot of opportunities there that I think are going to be pretty awesome once we start exploring them.
Yeah, so I was thinking about this a lot over the last couple days, and also how to not cannibalize my own talk later. But I think working in the healthcare space, something that always gets me really excited is anything that helps people unlock insights about their own bodies. Like 23andMe, which is a DNA sequencing kit you can now get in any drugstore in the United States and send it off and find out insights about whether or not you have some pre-markers for cancer or your ancestry. And so you can think of a possible future that if I have some markers for cancer, that I can start being prepared for that and for the future, like putting aside money for any treatments. The same thing they're doing with women's fertility health. So you can also see a really positive future where I as a woman can find out, what is my fertility future? Do I need to have my eggs frozen now because I want to stay in the workforce, or do I need to start preparing for a child? And that starts to really spin out, because will we have a much more equal workforce when women can actually decide and make a clear decision based on when to have a child versus not really knowing and having to try for a long time, or even do it at an inconvenient time in their working life. So.
Yeah, I was thinking about this on the way in as well. I think the technology, it isn't new or shiny, but it still seems to keep coming back and giving us more, which is Creative Commons and open source. Obviously, as an engineer, open source is amazing for learning. But if you look at things like Android, Android wouldn't be ubiquitous without the fact that we have Creative Commons and open source, and things like Swift as well recently. But also with some of the stuff that we're talking about here, I feel like, again, if we're not careful, we'll end up with lots of silos of data, our data, and we need ways to share that data and to have the rights to take that data back. And I feel like that's where things like Creative Commons can play a part again, in giving us the rights that we already expect. And that's the other thing I really like about Creative Commons. It's kind of created this idea that we expect there to be free, open information that we can download, we can go and get this stuff, we can learn. And it just keeps coming back, and it feels like one of the only ideals from that sort of the early days of engineering, where we thought that computers were going to save us all and give us this ubiquitous future. If you look at the Silicon Valley now compared to those early days, it's completely different. But at the same time, we still have Creative Commons, and it's still giving us the one ideal that seems to be persistent, which is information should be free and open.
Yeah. I certainly like the open source approach, an open approach, and it's really liberating a lot and really helping to advance other technologies. This is really great. How about? Now I have to speak louder. How about some dangers? We also spoke about that before when we prepared that technology, and then Jeff, you mentioned that when you were talking about positive tech. There are certain dangers which are connected with technology, with new technology. Like people are talking about AI becoming Skynet, another Skynet taking over everything. Yeah? That was in the movie 20 years ago or so, or 30 years ago actually. It's now. Robots which are stealing jobs, or even killer robots, killing people in the army. And last but not least, the privacy concerns. So what are your thoughts about dangers, and especially how we can protect, or what we can do to avoid the dangers with the new technologies which are introduced with every new technology that comes? Any insights into that?
So coming from the UK, where we now have some of the most draconian surveillance laws in the world, which is, again, a sentence I never thought I'd have to say, I feel like it is privacy, and for me, that it feels most under threat, certainly from the world that I live in day to day. But having said that very depressing sentence, I also am aware of the new EU regulations that are coming in May of next year, which are extraordinarily powerful for users. They allow users to demand to know the data that companies own on them, to get copies of that data, to challenge it, to ask how you made decisions based on that data, which is very interesting when we're talking about things like bots and AI and all these kinds of things. You can then turn around and say, well, why is it that you said that? What do you hold on me? What profile do you have of me that has allowed you to make that decision about me? And I think this is really powerful for the future, where there are going to be more and more decisions that are made about us that aren't made by a human being. They're made by a machine using data, which sounds terrifying, but I'm very excited that at least for all the problems of the EU, there is some smart people sitting in a room somewhere saying, well, how do we mitigate this? How do we give some of that power back? How do we allow people to not become an underclass, to not be decided that they're not worthy of being able to travel or being able to get, I don't know, a car or insurance or any other thing that they want, a mortgage? These things are going to be automated. I'm quite excited that someone has had the forethought to try and protect us from that.
You look like you're ready to go. No? Okay. I think there's, like I was saying earlier, like there's always going to be, it's human nature to think about the negative consequences of everything we do, and I do think it's a spectrum of like, if we have a real positive, there's going to be some sort of negative, and it is being conscious of it and making sure that, like, we had talked the other night about the rise of the gig economy. And I live in New York, and we have services for everything. Like, I can get somebody to do my laundry or pick me up in a car or, cook my food for me. And there's definitely been cases where startups who have never run a service organization before have definitely taken advantage of the people that are working, doing these gig jobs. And because there's not a whole lot of regulation in that sector yet for those, sort of small one-off gigs. And so I think remembering that there are people in the system always, and that and who are the humans that we're designing for, and always keeping them in mind. That's something that I think about a lot, even in the work that I do. Sometimes we'll be very, very focused on one user, but if we think about the whole system, there are other users within this system that are sort of secondary users or might be impacted by what we design. So always thinking about, who else is in this system that could be affected by this.
Yeah, I guess I have two things that scare me the most. One is probably privacy. It's pretty common, right? I mean, when I think of how many sites out there know so much about me that I just willingly handed over all of this information to them, there's probably sites out there that know more about me than I know about me at this point. Like, they've been tracking literally everything I've been doing online, and I'm not trying to put on a tinfoil hat here or anything, but I mean, it's kind of scary. And when I think that, my children don't know half the stuff that I know, even though they'll tell you they know more, they're out there and they're willingly handing over and sharing photos and things like that. And that scares me for sure. The other side of that is to build off what Siri said, and when we're not paying attention on who we're designing this for, like we always say, oh, this thing works on this device, it works on that device, but does it work for the person holding that device or the person looking at that device? We always fixate. We seem to think that our design and our work stops at the screen, and we forget about whatever's ingesting that content on that screen. So I worry in our race to be cool and have it look, for lack of a better term, sexy on a screen, it doesn't work for the person using it.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, only in movies really do we have to worry about the robots killing us. Because so far, we don't really have robots with machine guns.
That's exactly something a robot would say.
You found out. But what we have to worry about are the people who are building the robots, and we have to worry about the people who are writing the software, and we have to worry about the people who are designing the things, but ultimately those are just people. They're people like us, and I like to think that they're motivated by good intentions. Oftentimes, the truth is much more complicated than that. They're motivated by greed and self-interest. But we are a society of laws, and we are a society of rules, and it's fantastic to see that the EU is making rules to govern privacy and things. I wish America had the guts to do that as well. But it's clear that it's not so much the technology we have to worry about, but the people. It's pretty much always the case, right? I mean, it's not the guns you have to worry about, but the people who are carrying the guns. It's not the killer robots you have to worry about, but the people who build the killer robots. And yeah, I'm terrified of the spy cameras that my daughter wants to buy so that she can check out her outfit every morning. It just kills me. Just kills me.
Okay, yeah, I think our organization and governments especially have some responsibility to make sure that the technology is not used in the wrong way.
And I really think that's what it comes down to, is it's the only way we can govern the technology, because we as individuals and technologists, it is our job to run fast ahead and push the boundaries. And it's the job of those who govern to say, wait a minute, let's be sensible. Maybe you shouldn't build that mini black hole generator that's going to obliterate the planet.
Okay, so let's move to another part of the positive tech topic. So basically improving lives of others. We are, as I said before, we are privileged to be able to use all the technologies that we create. But there are many people who aren't. So they are disabled people. There are people who are poor, old, uneducated, or don't have access to internet, or live in the countries where it's generally to be dangerous to be there, and like using internet is not even thought about. So, what are the important things that you see in that are happening for those kinds of people and those people who are less able than or less lucky than we are? Maybe Jeff, you can start with your initial ideas.
Well, one of the things that is super challenging to me, especially, as a parent, is to see the fact that technology really isn't trickling down, right? I mean, we have all the latest and greatest things in our lovely world, especially in the west coast of the U.S., right, where we're rich and well off, and in Seattle, where I live, we have quite a lot of homeless folks. It's a very gentle climate and good social services and everything else, but one of the things that in an effort of cost cutting, the governments are doing and the aid organizations are doing is putting all of their information online. Well, poor people and homeless people don't have any way to get online. So they don't know what times the shelters are open. They don't know whether the shelters have beds. They don't know whether the food banks have available services. And so they don't have really any way to participate in these admittedly wealth of resources, which are all online. But, how do they participate? And so one of the programs that's been going on is a way of taking hand-me-down phones. So presumably, when I get a new phone, I'll take the one that I currently have and I'll give it to my daughter. And then the one that she has will be donated to one of these organizations, and they'll hand it out to someone who doesn't have a phone or needs a new phone. And then they'll be able to access these resources, so they'll be able to know when the shelter has beds and when they can get some food from the food bank and things like that. And that's a tremendous resource, because otherwise they just have no way of participating in these technologies and facilities that we all take for granted all the time, right? It's kind of crucial.
I think I can pick up on that. So in the UK, there was a bot built recently to help people to challenge when they get a parking ticket. And it's been very, very successful indeed. And the guy who invented it, whose name slips my mind right now, had asked for other ways that he can use this same technology. And one of the ways that it's now being used by Shelter is to help homeless people to navigate the horrendous system that we have for getting benefits. And so you can now go to Shelter or indeed use a mobile phone. You can talk to this bot and it will have a conversation with you, and it will learn all the bits of information that it needs in plain English, and then tell you what to do next to go and get benefits, to get housing, to find shelter. Yeah, stuff like that I think is a way to democratize technology. I mean, there's all this sort of thing. The famous quote about, the future's here, it's just not evenly distributed. This is, I think, a way to distribute some of that technology down to people who, let's be honest, probably need it a great deal more than we need the latest tweets.
Hmm? And how about disabled people, or Billy?
Disabled people for sure. We're doing a lot, and I mean, the sad part is though it's 2017. The internet's been around for a bunch of years now, and we're still screwing up things like form labels. But we'll get to that. Mm-hmm. I think the older users are the ones that are benefiting a lot right away, because I mean, a lot of the time the elderly community is very isolated. They might not have family or anything else, and the ability, to use a poor example, because my dad is anything but underprivileged, but he just had major spinal surgery a couple of weeks ago, and he was in the hospital. And the hospital is about an hour and change away from, my mom. So she had to drive back and forth every day. And when he was in the hospital, he was lonely and felt cut off from the world. So I bought them both iPhones. I didn't buy them. I'm not that rich. They bought their own iPhones, and I showed them how to use them. And just to see the look on their face when they realized that all of this technology existed, that they had no idea. Like, my dad had no idea that you could speak and dictate into a phone and have it send a message to somebody, which is amazing. I was sending him pictures all last week from India of all these amazing sites and expecting to hear a reply from him, and all I got back 3 days later was him saying, "I'm watching the rain, reading my book." So he hasn't quite learned how to use technology, or at least say, "Hey, nice pictures," but he's getting there. But I am worried, though, that we're going to leave these users behind, because we're building all of these really super complex apps that older users, I mean, my kids can pick up iPhones and use them no problem. My parents, they struggle. Mm-hmm. And, I don't want to cannibalize my own talk, to quote Siri, but, we're all we know which direction we're all heading in, and it's not getting younger. Mm-hmm. So I'm worried that we're engineering a world that we aren't going to be able to live in someday.
I don't know what the healthcare system is like in Poland, but in the United States, it really, your quality of care can really depend on how much money you have or where you live. And so Watson for Oncology, which is not a product I work on, and not going to cannibalize my talk because I'll talk about something different, but is a tool that helps to find within a patient's medical record critical information, and then generate a treatment recommendation based on training from oncologists at Memorial Sloan Kettering, which is one of the #1 cancer centers in the world. And this tool is now live in India and China and Thailand, Malaysia, I might have gotten that wrong, but so it democratizes care. So now I can be living in a rural India and get the same treatment option that somebody who's living on the Upper East Side of Manhattan would get. And so that's the real sort of improving lives that I see, is that, technology is going to give everyone the same access to care. I mean, specifically in healthcare. So.
That's amazing, yeah, to hear that this is happening. Yeah. But now maybe there are some questions from the audience to the panelists regarding the positive tech. We've heard quite a lot of insights already. We have a microphone there, and is there anyone who would like to ask some question to our panelist?
Nobody wants to be the
No
first
coffee?
person.
Maybe we ask you questions. like how do you frame positive tech?
Yeah. Anyone who would like to say that? Yeah. What's positive tech means for you? Why did you come to MCE seeing the positive tech tagline? Any brave soul to speak first?
I just want to say one word that might trigger our amazing panelists to share their thoughts. Education.
Education? A question mark.
Okay.
Because we didn't talk about it at all. Yeah.
That's true.
I know nothing about ed tech.
Well, actually, there's one picture that you've been seeing. There's one picture that you've been seeing up there, which is the telesecundaria schools down in Mexico and Central America, and they're really amazing. They were started in 1968, and they're a fantastic example of using technology to help people. And the gist is that Mexico has a lot of very, very remote villages, very poor villages, and they just don't have enough teachers for the kids. And so the Mexican government isn't going to let their kids go uneducated. So they put some television antennas on the top of the schools, and they broadcast the education to the schools. Now, obviously, television isn't the best way now to get there, so they have fixed wireless now on the top of the schools, and they broadcast the internet to the schools. So they're getting, wireless internet to these schools out in these remote jungle locations, and kids are getting their education via email and Skype and who knows what else. And it's fantastic. And my daughter and I were down in Cancun on vacation, and we were at these Mayan ruins, and, just having a good old time, and the tour guide was pointing this all out, and we didn't really think that much of it until we actually met this guy on the beach. She was playing with his daughters. And I was telling him about the school, thinking, I was making a big deal of the school. And he actually stopped me and he said, I went to one of those schools. And it turns out he's an accountant in Merida and lives a totally middle-class lifestyle, just more or less like I do. And he vacations in the same place that I vacation. And he came from a little jungle village in the middle of nowhere. And thanks to the fact that he got his education via broadcast wireless, it's like, wow, that's pretty amazing. That's technology that actually helped somebody, and that's the sort of thing that I feel like we ought to be doing.
I thought of one. I saw a blog the other day about Microsoft is helping kids with dyslexia learn how to read better. And as somebody who was dyslexic or is dyslexic, it is a real challenge in public schools to not be able to read. When you get to a certain level, it's normally like second or third grade, they start to notice that you can't read as well as the rest of your class. And dyslexia is always said as it's, as sort of a negative thing, but it's actually positive thing. It just means that the brain decodes information differently. And so by unlocking this information for these kids much earlier, I just thought that is so powerful and what an advantage it will give them, because it's not their fault. The system was just not built for them to learn that way. And here's a way to help them, decode that information and then give them access to all that knowledge. So I thought that was really cool.
Okay, fantastic. Anyone else would like to cover some topics?
Yeah, I wonder about regulation, because there are many tech companies today that are fighting against regulation and see it as a hindrance to advancement, while others, like Michael mentioned, the EU privacy rules. Do you think regulation is necessary for positive tech, or do you think it's a hindrance?
I think any innovation throughout the history of mankind has been frustrated by the regulations that have come in usually afterwards. So if you think back to the days of the Industrial Revolution and like threshing machines, for example, in the UK, it took a long time before they realized that these things were killing children and maybe we should do something about it. And certainly the owners of the threshing machines were upset that machines were covered in a bit of blood and they had to find a new child, but they certainly weren't going to do much about it. So we had regulation and they weren't happy about that. So it's always been there as like a regulation comes in because hopefully we as the people decide that we think it's the right thing to do. That's not always the case with regulation, but hopefully that's where most of the regulation comes from. And I think then it's healthy. So yeah, the gig economy, which we talked about, is I think a really perfect example. So we see people like in the UK, obviously there's been a lot of discussion about Uber and Airbnb, and more recently Deliveroo and Uber Eats, and there's so many of them. But yeah, they all have an incentive to make money, and that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do as a business. But that incentive tends to override any other incentive. And so it is for governments to step up and say, we understand that you're a business and you want to make money, but we also think that for the fair and honest running of that business, you need to behave in a certain way. So I think regulation is important, but clearly at the same time, it has to be done with an understanding of how it's going to shape that business in the future. So you certainly don't want sort of protectionism or that kind of thing. Some businesses are going to disappear in the future, other new ones are going to flourish. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that governments face right now, is understanding how to move us through what's going to happen and not protect industries that are at the end of their life, but also to protect the people that are going to be involved in the industries that are going to go and the industries that are coming now as well.
Okay, anyone?
Go on.
Okay. Anyone else wants to ask questions? Okay, for now, I think we can move to the part which is about the title of the panel. We are counting on you. So the question is like how attendees, how you can help to make positive tech happen. And that's my question. That's my final question to the panelists. Like, can you maybe share your thoughts about how attendees, how the regular developer designers that are here, how they can help with making positive tech happen?
So everyone in this room is extremely educated, I suspect, certainly extremely skilled. You're probably excellent developers and designers. So you have a skill set that is still quite rare, and it makes us a very privileged group. Stop that being the case. Help other people, teach other people. Last year I was at a meetup and I met this guy called Naveen, and he was a release manager, but he wanted to be a Swift developer, and he'd been teaching himself Swift for some time, but hadn't been able to get a job, and he was like, can you help? And so I said, yes, of course. So we met up, and I could quickly see how being self-taught wasn't giving him enough of foundations. So we worked together for about a year. He's now got a job, and I learned so much by working with him, and then I have the reward of him now having a job, which I constantly get texts going, is this what really happens in the work? Is this how you do it? Who cut corners like this? Why do we release code that's finished? All these kinds of things. So yeah, let's stop being a privileged few, and let's reach out and find other people and make us the privileged many.
Yeah, I think my comments are very similar to yours, which is I think everyone here, unless you're like working on getting children to smoke cigarettes, probably works on technology that brings people joy or helps them to purchase things or whatever. And I think that we can be more positive in how we see the work that we do. And then as well to be generous with our time and our skills in areas where maybe people don't have those skills. I mean, there's plenty of nonprofits that you can contribute your skills to online or in a classroom or for, different underserved populations. There's plenty of opportunities if you are interested in that.
So I'm going to go a little bit further than that. I suspect some of you are thinking about your next career move. Because, I mean, we're all technologists of one sort or another, and we tend to change jobs more frequently than other people. And, I mean, it's possible that maybe you can go build the next social network, maybe the next dog walking app, or, God forbid, the next juicer. But it's also possible you might go do something more socially responsible, because there are some really big causes out there. Some of them are like crushing. You know, you saw 63 million girls are not in school, 28 million people don't have access to clean drinking water. Those are things that maybe an app isn't going to solve. Probably not going to solve. But, you know, Alicia Carr built a great app to help with domestic violence. And she'd never built an app before. I guarantee you there are people in this room who could build an app to help with problems in their community, in their states, in their countries. Problems that I don't even know about because I don't know what the problems are in your towns, in your countries. And, you know, maybe you're at that stage in your life where you could go do something different. I'm not yet. I got 6 years to go before my daughter's out of high school, and I'm free to do something that doesn't pay me quite so well. But in the, yeah, I know. And in the meantime, I am doing the things that I can, right? I'm teaching people to speak and to be better in groups presenting and things like that. So maybe it's time to do something different. So it's not just about giving away your money. Maybe it's time to give away yourself.
I'll just pick the bike up off the floor after that mic drop. Every person in this room, whether you're a developer or a designer or QA or a project manager, wields a lot of power. You have the power to make or break someone's day. Possibly in the future, the power to save someone's life. Maybe somebody in this room will be the developer that finally makes it really easy for someone to access their health records online or reach out to a doctor quickly. Maybe you'll be the person that invents a new assistive technology that helps somebody. Because statistically, a lot of us in this room are not going to have the same bodies that we have right now in 10, 15, 5 to 1 tomorrow. We don't know. We don't know when that's going to happen. So it's up to us to sort of, and I'm not creating I'm boring a point here, but create the world that you want to live in now. Design for your future self, because you're going to need accessibility someday. You're going to need to access all of this information. If you won't, then maybe your children will, or maybe your parents will, but somebody will. And it's up to you and others like you to build that.
Yeah, that was really insightful. Thank you very much for all this. We have to finish, unfortunately. We just barely scratched the surface of positive tech, but we can explore it further on further MCE talks and discussions and networking. So feel free to do so. There are some talks from Michael, Siri, and Billy later that you can go a little deeper into details, and you can talk all the time with Jeff. He's here around. Thank you very much for the panel. It was great. Thank you. So just go enjoy MCE. Thank you.